L'Astoria Hotel, nestled on Via Manzoni in the heart of Milan, shimmered in the golden glow of Europe's tech conference season. White marble stretched across the hallways, and crystal chandeliers hung high, casting snowy light over the grand ballroom. Beneath that light, the most powerful names in technology, investors, founders, influencers, drifted past in silk and champagne, trailing quiet arrogance behind them. In a shadowed corner of the event hall, between rows of tech stations, Emilia Laurent knelt beside a bundle of stage cables. She wore a buttoned-up white shirt, gray khaki pants, worn-out slip-on shoes, her hair neatly tied up, no makeup. Around her neck hung a small badge that read Logistics Crew. No one paused to read her name, let alone recognize that this woman was the architect of the Aegis chain security system, currently safeguarding classified data for 9 member nations of the European Union. A female voice rang out, cold, sharp as shattering glass. "You there." From the main entrance strode Isabella Volkova, CEO of Luxor AI, in a wine-red evening gown, bold crimson lips, and an imperious gaze, flanked by her entourage. She pointed directly at the floor. "This area's slippery. Clean it up. Don't let a VIP fall because of your logistics crew." Laughter erupted from the group. "She's messier than a mop. Looks like she wandered out of the kitchen. Probably here to scrub the toilets." Emilia said nothing. She bent down, picked up a damp cloth, and knelt on one knee, folding the rag and wiping the marble floor as the laughter cut through the room like a dull blade. But her movements were unhurried. Each stroke was steady, precise, calm. Her back did not hunch, her eyes did not lower, her hands did not tremble. She did not bow her head, nor offer a single excuse, as if the insult could not penetrate the surface of who she was. When she finished, she stood, unrushed. She didn't look around. The cloth was neatly returned to the table, and Emilia walked away as if completing a routine task. Yet to the eyes of an engineer who once coded 48 hours without sleep, every movement carried a quiet message. "I have never been beneath anyone." She moved down a long corridor behind the stage, where the sound and lighting systems were being tested. As Emilia crouched to inspect the 8th socket, a man's voice called out behind her. "This is TechSphere, not a public garden." It was Felix Roth, founder of Cortex's data analytics platform. Cobalt blue tie, Italian shoes polished to a mirror finish, half a smirk on his face. Emilia stood, gently adjusting a tulip arrangement. "I'm placing it according to the layout approved by the event organizers," she replied, evenly, without apology. "But I'm happy to make adjustments if needed." Felix squinted, then walked off without another word. Perhaps because he couldn't find a single crack to push further. Down the corridor to the technical zone, as Emilia reconnected an audio service cable, an older woman stopped to observe her. She wore a charcoal gray coat, silver hair in a low bun. "You're Emilia Laurent?" she asked gently. Emilia paused, turned slightly. "I'm Sophia Anderson. I served on GTECA's advisory board back when your mother was in charge." Marie always spoke of her daughter with those fierce eyes. Now I understand why. A sentence like a pebble dropped into still water. No one in that crowd remembered Marie Laurent, but Sophia did. "Thank you," Emilia whispered. The woman gave a simple nod and walked away, leaving behind a trace of lavender like a memory. At the far end of the hallway, a group of photographers tested lighting for the awards ceremony. As Emilia adjusted a spotlight, a sudden flash went off behind her. "She keeps popping up like a logistics ghost," one influencer giggled, her yellow silk dress trailing behind her. A man holding a Leica turned toward Emilia, raising the camera for another shot, but her gaze met his, calm but cutting right through the lens. He lowered the camera. No apology, just a silent nod. Near the stairwell leading to the kitchen, the scent of hand-roasted coffee hit her like a long-forgotten memory. A gray-haired server beside a trolley looked at her. "I heard them talking about you," he said quietly. "They don't know it was you who saved the data system I spent 30 years protecting." "I was just doing my job," Emilia replied. He shook his head. "No, you're doing the work of many silently." Emilia smiled, a fleeting smile on a face that needed no makeup to be beautiful. As she walked on, the marble floor caught the light and cast a soft glow behind her, as if the shadow of the disregarded had begun to stretch, slowly enveloping those who once laughed above her. No one knew the woman with the cleaning rag was Emilia Laurent, the very one who had once brought Europe's entire digital security framework to its knees in awe. But soon they would. Evening had arrived at its formal peak. Soft jazz faded into the background. The clinking of crystal glasses grew sparse as spotlights gradually focused on the main stage. A massive LED screen lit up with the TechSphere logo, glimmering like a digital star in the sky of the future. Emilia was inside the technical booth, fingers resting lightly on the soundboard's touchpad. Not to operate, just to verify the light data was syncing to the event script. Everything seemed smooth, until darkness fell. No warning, no error signal. All 6 primary LED displays, behind the stage and across the entire logo projection system, suddenly went black. People in the ballroom looked up, thinking it was a planned effect. Then came the murmurs, the confused whispers, curses in German, Italian, and French. A technician yanked on his headset and shouted, "Input sync error. No signal to the primary image processor." Another scrambled to replug cables, reseat the graphics card, test the HDMI output again. Still nothing. At the edge of the room, Isabella Volkova turned, eyes sweeping the tech zone for someone to blame, and she saw Emilia. "You again," Isabella said aloud. "I knew it. You should have stuck to wiping floors, not touching anything important." All eyes turned to Emilia, a woman in a white button-up, standing quietly at the control panel. Unimpressive, powerless, but unwavering. She stepped toward the master console and placed 2 fingers lightly on the keyboard. "It's not hardware," she said softly. Eyes locked on the diagnostics. Graphics driver conflict with the new OS patch. They installed a beta firmware. It's unstable. I can fix it. "Wait!" A junior engineer tried to stop her, but it was too late. Emilia's fingers moved like a pianist's, swift and precise. She typed with the ease of muscle memory. Uninstalling drivers, restarting the virtual kernel, running a custom patch. Within 40 seconds, the main screen flickered back to life. The TechSphere logo returned, spinning, glowing, untouched by the chaos that had just been. The ballroom erupted in applause. But no one knew the real reason. They just thought, "It's back. Everything's fine." And the woman who saved the system? She wasn't even on the program. Behind her, a young engineer stared, eyes wide like a child witnessing magic. "How did you?" Emilia shrugged. "I've patched defense-grade systems. This was just a puzzle." The applause continued, but only a few recognized who truly deserved it. Isabella sneered, grinding her teeth as she muttered, "Beginner's luck." Emilia turned to her with a calm gaze. "If it's luck, then I've had it for 10 years. The party resumed. Champagne flowed. Laughter returned. But in the technical booth, something had changed. A few young engineers came up to Emilia, asking for her name. The head technician glanced at the now stable console and gave her a small nod. No praise, just the look of someone who recognized skill. Amid the ambient QR scanners, decorative wall lights, and atmosphere returning to normal, a man stood silently at the corner of the booth, holding a paper cup of coffee. Wearing a worn leather jacket, streaks of silver in his hair, Viktor Petrov, once part of the founding group behind the earliest blockchain protocols 2 decades ago. He approached Emilia, voice low and sincere. "I used to think the new generation lacked precision. But those lines of code you just typed, that was G-Tech level." Emilia paused. Her eyes didn't tear, but softened for a moment. "I helped write the core for the platform my mother built." Victor nodded, like he had just spoken a spell. Then he turned and walked away. No more words were needed. In that crowded room, a quiet recognition had been kindled, like the first spark before a flame. Emilia stepped out of the control room, down the hallway behind the stage. Under the warm golden lights, her hand brushed the silver pen clipped to her pocket, engraved with the name Marielle. Next to it was a small folded note a tech assistant had handed her earlier. Emilia, don't forget, courage is sometimes as silent as a clean signal in a storm. She smiled gently, folded the note, and slipped it into her pocket. Her figure faded down the hallway, not as someone leaving power behind, but someone who had just quietly reignited a system, repaired a broken web, and shaken the false surface of appearances. The ballroom shimmered in luxury. Chandeliers bent like jeweled necklaces over the heads of the powerful. Music played softly but no longer sweetly. It had become the mask of smiling mouths hiding knives. Emilia quietly returned to her duties. She adjusted the emergency exit signage near the buffet table. A small, nameless task, but necessary. Her hands still bore dust from the tech booth, but her walk had changed. She no longer avoided gazes. Her eyes no longer sought shadows. Something had shifted, not in the system but in her own axis. Isabella Volkova noticed. From across the room, she watched Emilia like a predator spotting prey who had suddenly lifted its head. Discomfort clouded her flawless makeup. "Who does she think she is?" Isabella muttered, turning to Chiara Benedetti, a famous social media influencer live-streaming the event. "She thinks saving a screen gives her the right to lift her chin?" Isabella scoffed. "Let's remind her where she belongs." Chiara narrowed her eyes and nodded. A plan was whispered, like cheap wine poured into a chipped glass. 10 minutes later, Emilia stood by the dessert table, checking lighting on the digital menu. Isabella passed by, a Bellini cocktail in hand, her stride casual but gaze sharp, like a stalking tigress. Just one breath. The glass tipped. Thick orange liquid spilled across Emilia's white shirt, streaking from collar to waist. Under the chandelier's spotlight, it looked like someone had painted shame across her body with citrus and malice. Isabella feigned shock. "Oh, my. I'm so sorry. I thought you were a tablecloth. No one wears that color in Milan." Laughter burst out like firecrackers. A man in a silk tux doubled over. "Now she fits in. Keep wiping, sweetheart." A woman in satin clapped softly, hiding her mouth behind a fan. "She's a visual centerpiece. The disaster kind." Emilia didn't react immediately. She looked at the stain, didn't scrub, didn't speak. She gently touched her collar, as if checking the wound after being stabbed. Then she looked up. Her eyes met Isabella's without flinching, without rage. Only one thing filled her gaze. Self-worth, rising. "Accidents happen," she said. Low, clear, sharp. Then she turned. No hurry, no retreat, just walked. The laughter behind her dragged on, but out of sync. Some eyes turned sideways, hesitant. A technician bit his lip. A photographer lowered his camera. A young hostess clutched her notepad just a bit tighter. In the staff changing room, Emilia stood before a mirror. Her shirt clung damp to her skin, cold as stone. She wiped the stain with a warm towel, but the Bellini scent lingered. On a bench lay a second white shirt, neatly folded since morning. She had packed it just in case, as if her instinct had warned her. In silence, she changed. As she buttoned up, her fingers brushed something in the old shirt's pocket. A small silver locket, dulled with age. Inside was a photo of her mother, Emilia Laurent, smiling in an old G-Tech lab, eyes full of light. Tucked beside it, a tiny slip of paper in slanted handwriting. "If they can't see your worth, build so bright they'll trip over it." Emilia smiled, not out of forgiveness, not to forget, but because she remembered why she had come. Not to clean floors, not to endure, but to observe and wait for the right moment. She slipped on the clean shirt, clipped the silver pen back to her pocket, adjusted her cuffs, and stood tall before the mirror. This was no longer just a logistics worker, not merely an engineer. This was someone who carried a secret about her real role in the very room where Europe's highest honors were about to be handed out. She stepped out, walking the carpeted hallway like a stage awaiting its lights. Her logistics crew badge still pinned, but it no longer defined her. At the end of the corridor, the MC was introducing the next honorees. Names were being called, titles celebrated. But behind those lights, a crack had formed in the mosaic. And what shattered from that spilled Bellini was not just citrus and dignity, but the mask of those clinging to a fragile, false order. The ballroom remained steeped in opulence. Chandeliers curled downward like necklaces draped around the neck of the world. The music still played softly, but it was no longer gentle. It now sounded like the mask of smiles concealing knives. Emilia quietly returned to her post. She adjusted the emergency exit signage near the buffet, a small, nameless task, but one that mattered. Her hands still bore dust from the tech booth. But her walk had changed. Her steps no longer avoided eyes. Her gaze no longer searched for shadows. Something had shifted, not in the control systems, but in the axis within her. Isabella Volkova noticed. From the center of the room, she watched Emilia the way a predator watches prey that has begun to lift its head. Displeasure clouded her perfectly made-up face. Who does she think she is? Isabella muttered, turning to the woman beside her, Chiara Benedetti, a famous social media influencer live-streaming the entire evening. She thinks fixing a screen gives her the right to lift her chin? Isabella scoffed. We'll remind her where she belongs. Chiara narrowed her eyes and nodded subtly. A plan was whispered, like wine poured secretly into a chipped porcelain glass. 10 minutes later, Emilia stood by the dessert table, checking the lighting on the digital menu. Isabella passed by, Bellini cocktail in hand, walking casually, though her eyes prowled like a tigress on the hunt. One breath. The cocktail tilted. A stream of dark orange liquid spilled directly onto Emilia's white shirt, soaking into her collar, trailing down the buttons to her waist. Under the chandelier's spotlight, it looked like someone had drawn a stripe of humiliation across her body with fruit and spite. Isabella gasped theatrically. Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you were a tablecloth. No one wears that color in Milan. Laughter burst like firecrackers in winter. A man in a silk suit nearly choked on his drink. Now she fits the setting. Go on, keep cleaning, sweetheart. A woman in a satin gown clapped lightly, hiding her grin behind a fan. She's a visual highlight, more like a visual disaster. Emilia didn't respond immediately. She looked at the spreading stain, made no attempt to wipe it, said nothing. Her fingers touched her collar as if checking a wound after being stabbed. Then she raised her head. Her eyes met Isabella's, not trembling, not angry. Only one thing burned in them, a rising self-worth. Accidents happen, she said. Her voice was low, clear, sharp. Then she turned. No rush. No panic. She simply walked away. The laughter continued, but it stuttered, lost its rhythm. Some eyes began to glance sideways, uncertain. A technician bit his lip. A photographer didn't press the shutter. And a young woman on the hostess team gripped her notebook a little tighter. In the staff changing room, Emilia stood before the mirror. Her shirt clung to her like ice. She wiped at the stain with a warm towel, but the scent of Bellini lingered. On a chair lay a second white shirt, one she had folded neatly that morning, just in case, as if instinct had already warned her. She changed in silence. As she buttoned up, her fingers brushed something small in the pocket of the old shirt, a silver locket dulled with time. She opened it gently. Inside was a photo of her mother, Emilia Laurent, smiling in the old G-Tech lab, eyes lit with brilliance. Tucked beside it was a tiny slip of paper, its slanted handwriting still legible. If they can't see your worth, build so bright they'll trip over it. Emilia smiled, not out of forgiveness. Not to forget. But because she remembered why she came. Not to clean floors. Not to endure humiliation. But to observe and wait for the right moment. She put on the clean shirt, reclipped the silver pen to her pocket, straightened her cuffs, and stood tall before the mirror. This was no longer a logistics worker. Not just an engineer. This was someone harboring a secret about her true role in the very room where Europe's most prestigious award was about to be given. She stepped out of the room, walking the carpeted corridor like a stage still awaiting its spotlight. The logistics crew badge remained pinned to her chest, but it no longer defined who she was. At the far end of the hallway, the MC had begun the award introductions. Names were being read. Titles praised. But behind the lights, the first fracture had formed in the mosaic. And what spilled from that Bellini wasn't just fruit and pride. It was the mask of those clinging to a false order now beginning to peel away. No one dared say a word as Emilia turned her back and walked off the stage. No applause. No praise. No congratulations. Only sudden, darting glances, flickering eyes, and a hollow stillness that drained the air from a room once pulsing with pride. Isabella remained standing, one hand gripping the back of a chair, the other hanging limp. Her face was pale, no layer of makeup could conceal the expression cracking like thin glass. Her expensive silk dress, still stained with Bellini, hadn't dried. Under the spotlight, the stain was even more prominent, like a mark that couldn't be scrubbed clean. Emilia walked past the rows of seats. No one called her back. Those who had once told her to step aside, who had pointed and laughed, now bowed their heads, feigned interest in their phones, or patted the person next to them in a futile attempt to shift the room's attention. But the silence that now filled the hall wasn't the silence of shock, it was the silence of recognition, rising like a tide. At table 3, where the investors sat, a man in a pinstriped suit was on the phone with his assistant. His voice was hushed but urgent. Check immediately if Luxor AI has a priority exit clause. If it does, trigger it. Now. At table 5, the female founder of a venture capital fund sat frozen, whispering to her assistant. That's Emilia Laurent. I once took a picture with her at the Brussels conference and didn't even realize. In the far right corner of the ballroom, a group of young engineers murmured to one another. One of them, a woman in a moss-green blazer who had once laughed when Emilia mopped the floor, was now looking toward the stage, her gaze suspended between her glasses and her shame. Backstage, in the dark, the MC approached Emilia. He held the microphone in both hands, as though trying to summon something profound, but in the end, he only sighed. You know, he whispered, I've introduced hundreds of people. But today, I finally understand what makes an introduction truly meaningful. Emilia didn't respond. She gave a small nod and walked on. No self-congratulation. No looking back. She left the stage not as someone who had stepped up for glory, but as someone who had simply come to clean up. In a quiet corner backstage, Isabella followed. Her silk gown dragged across the floor with a sound like a blade being drawn. Emilia. Miss Laurent, please wait. Isabella called breathlessly, the click of her high heels sharp against the wooden floor. Emilia stopped, but didn't turn. Isabella caught up to her, standing face to face. Her eyes were red and wet, whether from wine, fear, or the dawning realization that her world had shifted on its axis. About earlier, it was a misunderstanding. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I can fix this. Please don't pull the investment. I need it. The company needs it. If you pull out, Luxor will collapse. Her voice caught on the final word, her pride swallowed down her throat. Emilia looked at her. Silent. Then she spoke, her voice not loud, but sharp enough that no one could walk away from it unchanged. I'm not withdrawing because I was insulted. I'm withdrawing because I saw how you treated someone you believed had no value. And I believe sooner or later you'll treat everyone that way, your team, your partners, even those who trust you most. I don't invest in that. I invest in dignity. Isabella had nothing left to say. A single tear slipped from her eye, not a tear of remorse, but one of late realization. The sting of truth. Emilia turned and walked away. Down the long hallway leading out of the L'Astoria Hotel, Emilia walked alone. No entourage. No spotlight. Yet every step she took echoed louder than all the night's speeches combined. Beyond the glass doors, a man waited, Adrian, her husband. He wore a simple gray coat, hands in his pockets. When he saw Emilia, he gave her a small nod, no questions, no explanations needed. He already knew just from her eyes. She nodded back and walked to him. They didn't speak. But when his hand touched her back and hers found his, it was the first time that night Emilia leaned on someone, not because she was weak, but because she had gone far enough. The car door closed. The sedan pulled away from the square, quiet as a punctuation mark. Behind them, the hotel remained lit. But the light inside was no longer the glow of triumph, it was the cold, unforgiving glare that revealed every face who had laughed at the wrong person, misjudged the wrong one, and backed the wrong cause. The footage capturing the moment Emilia refused Isabella's handshake and calmly stated, I invest in dignity, garnered over 7.2 million views in a single night. No background music, no effects, just white lighting and a single sentence. But it was precisely that clarity that swept away all the polished marketing theatrics. A young engineer who had attended the gala reposted the video with the caption. That night, I learned something. Power doesn't come from the stage, but from the person who dares to stand up from the lowest place. Below it were hundreds of comments, many from event crew, technicians, and backstage managers. They saw themselves in Emilia's stance. Luxor AI, Isabella's company, officially lost 38% of its market value within 48 hours of the gala. News outlets reported the withdrawal of its largest investor. Partners suspended negotiations. The media dubbed it a moral fissure in the upper crust of commercial AI. Chiara Benedetti, the one who had laughed when Emilia was soaked with wine, had 3 sponsorships cancelled for promoting degrading behavior toward event staff. The video of her laugh was repurposed in PR ethics training. Felix Roth from the startup Cortexa hurriedly removed all his gala photos. Yet internal employees came forward accusing him of past remarks similar to those heard at the gala. One employee posted publicly, "Turns out the person you said was dirtier than the floor holds the root encryption key for the API you're using." A long silence swept through tech Twitter for 24 hours, no posts, no retweets. At GTech's Zurich office, Emilia didn't check the news. She sat at her oak desk, resting her hand on a small brass plaque that read, "Integrity above all," once her mother's, now beside her keyboard. Her assistant entered with a small parcel. A young woman with cropped hair and a nose ring spoke softly. "They left this at reception. It has your name on it." Emilia opened it. Inside was an old leather notebook, spine lightly cracked, corners frayed. On the first page, in handwritten script, "Grace and Steel, just like your mother." Signed, Viktor Petrov, a veteran blockchain engineer who had stood behind her in the control booth during the gala. Emilia smiled. She didn't send thanks. She didn't need to. People like Viktor understood each other in silence. At a small tech talk in Oslo, a young developer presented a new open-source platform. When asked why she had shifted from gaming to blockchain security, she simply said, "Because back in 2019, I read a code snippet on GitHub written by Emilia Laurent. It taught me that engineering isn't about making fast money, it's about protecting the ones who move slower." Her words spread quickly across developer circles. On a gray morning in Milan, Isabella Volkova sat alone in an empty conference room, staring at her laptop screen. The message from GTC Capital still glowed. Full withdrawal. No negotiation. She had tried reaching out, emails, favors through mutual contacts. But no reply. And it was that silence that hit the hardest. The disconnection wasn't in the balance sheet, it lay between character and the pride she had once worn like armor. For the first time in years, Isabella removed her earbuds, turned off her phone, and sat quietly in a room filled with no sound. That evening, Emilia stood by her office window watching the Zurich lights reflect on the lake. In her hand was a cup of peppermint tea, not champagne. On her desk was an unsent email containing only one sentence. "You never know who's mopping the floor. It might be the person rewriting your rulebook." She read it again, then deleted it, because the most powerful things don't always need to be said. 3 weeks after the gala, the tech world seemed to return to orbit. Events resumed, funding rounds announced, and CEOs once again graced magazine covers. But beneath that surface, something had shifted. No one could pretend that the tremor named Emilia Laurent had been a fluke. It had become a fault line, a marker after which every glance, every boardroom metric, every speech about company culture now had to be recalibrated. At a quiet conference in Bergen, Norway, in a lecture hall at the University of Applied Sciences, a young female coder had just finished her demo for a decentralized anti-fraud blockchain. She wore a plain gray blazer, hair tied neatly, no accessories. When she finished, she didn't give an elaborate thank you or credit her tech team. She simply looked at the audience and said, "I'm the first in my family to attend university. I didn't choose tech because of passion. I chose it because in 2021, I read a debug comment on GitHub. The author was Emilia Laurent. She didn't write about performance or speed, she wrote, 'Don't build to impress, build to protect.'" The room was silent for a long moment. Then someone clapped. Then another. Not loud, but steady, like the way true influence spreads, quietly, precisely, without spectacle. In Zurich, GTech's office remained tucked behind rows of Swiss banks, quiet as a digital-era monastery. Emilia arrived on time as always. She still walked from the nearby station. Still brewed her own coffee. Still greeted the logistics crew at the start of every day. There were no PR teams trailing behind. No slideshow labeled Inspiration Keynote. But everyone in the building knew, on the 4th floor, in the meeting room with a brass plaque reading "Integrity above all," people automatically silenced their phones and lowered their voices. That was Emilia's room. One winter morning, while reviewing a technical audit for an open-source project, her young assistant walked in, short hair, nose ring, placing a small recycled package on her desk, a little hesitantly. "Someone left this at reception. No sender's name. I think you should open it." Emilia nodded, thanked her, and opened the box. Inside was an old, faded photo of herself around age 10, standing beside her mother, Marie Laurent, in GTech's first lab. In the picture, Marie wore a white lab coat, her hands still dusty from the machines, smiling gently at her daughter. On the back of the photo, in faded purple ink, was a handwritten note. "Build with heart." No signature, but Emilia knew the handwriting. It was Sophia Anderson, the oldest advisor to ever work with her mother. Emilia sat silently for a long time, pen in hand but no longer writing. For the first time in months, she wasn't an engineer, or a director, or a symbol. She was simply Marie's daughter. And someone trying to live up to the word legacy, not through speeches but through daily choices. A week later, at the Tech for Dignity event hosted by the UN in Copenhagen, Emilia was invited to speak. She declined. Not out of pride, but because she believed the most important things didn't need repeating. The organizers didn't insist. Instead, they played a short video, no music, no effects, just footage of Emilia quietly cleaning a marble floor at the TechSphere gala, then stepping onto the stage in a white suit, declining Isabella Volkova's handshake. When the words "I invest in dignity" echoed through the speakers, no one stood, no one cheered. But a software engineer from Ghana placed his hand over his chest. And a nonprofit founder from Palestine pulled out his phone to jot down 3 words. Worth following. In that moment, Emilia wasn't there. But she was everywhere. In a co-working space in Amsterdam shared by a team of independent developers, a line of text was taped on the wall, printed in small font, nestled between startup posters and tech memes. Treat data like someone you love, not something to exploit. No source was listed, but everyone knew where it came from. It was from a comment in an open-source repository by Emilia Laurent, rediscovered and passed around Slack, Reddit, and beyond. It became a quiet moral compass among people who had never met her but had felt her through code. At a university in Cape Town, a senior professor lectured on transparency in blockchain architecture. On the screen, no quotes from CEOs. No billion-dollar case studies. Only a single still image. Emilia mopping the floor. No caption. No effect. But the class sat upright. No one laughed. They had heard the story. And they knew it. That image was a silent warning. If you only respect the person with the microphone, you shouldn't be an engineer. You should be in marketing. At a tech bar in Berlin, after a heated debate among founders about AI ethics, a quiet young woman, unnoticed until then, pulled out a slip of paper and placed it on the table. 3 words. Laurent's Rule 1. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what it meant. Watch how they treat the lowest person in the room. That's how they'll treat you when you're vulnerable. No one laughed after that. No policies needed. No lectures. Just one rule passed quietly, like ritual. Not dogma, but undeniable. And still there were the emails Emilia never replied to, the thank you notes she never reposted, the group photos she never shared, the software patches she quietly fixed at midnight without putting her name in the changelog. Those things didn't make her more famous. They made others better. One early spring day, Emilia walked along Lake Zurich wearing a light coat, the wind brushing her hair. Over her shoulder was an old fabric tote, no logo, no brand. Inside was the draft of a scholarship fund proposal titled, "For the Quiet Ones, a tuition and mentorship program for engineering students who had once been invisible in class, laughed at for speaking up, or forgotten backstage." At the bottom of the draft was one final line. Because one day, the person mopping the floor might be holding the keys to your system. Emilia looked out over the still water and saw her reflection, not as someone on a stage. Not a director. Just someone walking the right path. And in that silence she knew. She had left behind something worth keeping. Even if no one remembered where she had walked from.